Give the people what they want, brought to you every week almost from People's Dispatch. That's Zoe. And I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. Of course, you got to start with the story from Gaza. The UN's National Mine Service, their service that looks at mining, has now said that the war so far has created an estimated debris of 37 million tons. The last time I reported this 2 weeks ago, I said it was 28 million tons. It is now 37 million tons, much more increased amount of rubble. What's really concerning, of course, there's been the bombardment and the death toll above 35,000. Some people saying, in fact, that's a deflated number. It may be closer to 50,000. At any rate, what they are now saying is that apart from all this, everything you've heard, and I'm going to come back to a couple of interesting things I think of note for us to put on the table. Apart from all this, what we are now being told by the United Nations is that 10% of the ammunition that the Israelis have fired on Gaza failed to function, which means that the unexploded ordnance in Gaza, friends, now please bear in mind this, very important. The unexploded ordnance will take 14 years to clear at the rate at which the UN generally clears a war zone. So let me put these two facts to you on the table again. 37 million tons of debris sitting in Gaza. A colleague of mine who's the structural engineer said that if you bulldoze all this into the Mediterranean Sea, you could make virtually an entire new Gaza. So 37 million tons of debris, and it would take 14 years to clear the ordnance, the unexploded bombs that Israel has dropped in Gaza. That means that yet thousands of people may be killed if those bombs go off, if they are hit unwittingly by children, by adults, and so on. That is the situation. Meanwhile, reports have come from Al Nasser Hospital. It's interesting. There have been several reports from different hospital complexes, the Al Shifa Hospital Complex, now Al Nasser Hospital Complex. There's discovery of mass graves at these hospital complexes. The one in Al Nasser is pretty disturbing. A large number of people, they all look like civilians being killed and buried. Now, interestingly, the Israelis aren't denying that they bombed and they are not denying that they even killed people. They are not even denying that there are people in mass graves. What they're denying is who's digging them up and so on. They're making a big deal of that. But these mass graves, which is very, very disturbing. As far as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said in a press release earlier this week, her name is Ravina Shamdasani. She said that there were allegedly older people, women, and wounded, while others were found tied with their hands tied and stripped of their clothes. This is extraordinary. I mean, the UN, faced with this, has talked about war crimes and so on. This is separate from the International Criminal Court's finding of plausibility of genocide. It's separate from that. This is just these incidents themselves of people with hands tied, thrown into what then are mass graves. That itself is a war crime. These are civilians who have been killed and so on. So, the situation in Gaza still remains perilous. 14 years to clear unexploded ordnance, and then mass graves being discovered. Meanwhile, of course, the bombing creeping closer and closer to Rafah, the city where bulk of the people who have been herded, as it were, by the bombardment are now sitting. I mean, the bombing getting closer and closer to them is a very dangerous sign. That is, in fact, the situation in Gaza. I'm going to come back to the story on Gaza in a little bit when we talk about the student encampments in the United States. We're not dropping that off, but I do want to change gears in a second, Zoe, to come to you to get your report on the ALBA TCP meeting in Venezuela, the meeting of the social movements and then of the heads of government of ALBA TCP, all sort of in anticipation of a presidential election that will be held in Venezuela later this year. So, Zoe, you and I were both in Venezuela recently. I'm now in Ireland, but tell us a little bit about what you experienced in Venezuela.
Well, yes, there was a series of meetings last week that took place in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Caracas, a home to many of these very important multilateral, multi-foreign meetings. And in that sense, I mean political parties, governments, movements, all people of the left, of progressive camp coming together to discuss and debate. Caracas has a rich tradition under the commander Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution of hosting such types of encounters and meetings. You and I were first started at the World Meeting for a Social Alternative. This was organized by ALBA TCP, which is the platform for economic and political integration in the Caribbean and Latin America, which has over 10 member states and was founded by Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro in 2004. It was co-organized by the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Friendship with the People. 500 delegates coming together, all condemning Israel's genocide in Palestine, but not just that, also discussing, it's 2024, we're seeing new forms of the far right across Latin America. We're in a very different situation than we were just 1 year ago. We've seen the rise of figures like Milei. We've seen the Bukele model, as it's now called, of the harsh crackdown on the youth, on young people, building these mega prisons. We've seen the situation in Ecuador. So really kind of revising that situation in the region, of course, given the high participation of people from across Latin America and the Caribbean, but also there was a very rich participation of people from across the world, namely from Africa and Asia, bringing experiences from the region. As many people have been paying more and more attention to how imperialism acts, of course, in Gaza, of course, in Palestine, but also across Africa, the situation of the Sahel states, the fight against French colonialism, the situation in Sudan with the civil war. So very rich debate. You, of course, spoke about hyper-imperialism, which I think has been adopted very quickly by many people across the world to really have a concept and a framing to understand the situation that we're living in right now, and how to understand how the US and its allies act in the world, the reality of military spending, the reality of their military predominance across the world. So many interesting debates. We also know that there was a day of a youth meeting where youth, again, across the world, brought together by the International People's Assembly, debated what organizations of youth are doing across the world. It comes, of course, at a very interesting moment, given the upsurge in youth mobilizing. Of course, we're going to get to that a bit later, but really challenging this idea that maybe has come out of some different elections in Argentina and other places, that working class youth are just subservient to their phones and to fake news and all of these other things. But actually right now we're seeing this upsurge of revolutionary activism and militancy across the world that is being led by the youth. So in that context, in this series of meetings, all of these international delegates, including myself, was very lucky to participate, or rather observe, what was the popular consultation process that took place in Venezuela this past Sunday. Venezuela, of course, is a very rigorous and a very frequent electoral processes in the country. I think there's been over 25 electoral processes since 1999. This was a special one, and this was actually the first of its kind. They weren't voting for mayors, they weren't voting for governors, they were voting as communities, as people in communes across Venezuela, to decide what projects they wanted to be funded in their communities. And so this is a sort of exercise which is probably unheard of across the globe, because how often do you get to tell your government how you want your money to be spent? I know, at least in the United States, with so much money of our tax dollars being spent towards war and towards the military industrial complex, it definitely never happens that you're actually having a say in how you want state resources to be allocated and how the community, it's not only voting on that day, but actually people in these communes across Venezuela had a very long consultation process. They came up with their own lists of what kind of projects they would like to vote on to be funded. So a really, really interesting experience. I'm working on a report that will be coming out soon on People's Dispatch about this extremely interesting exercise of participatory democracy, which is, of course, the cornerstone of the Bolivarian Revolution. Not just the state giving out welfare, not just the state using the oil resources to make better schools, but actually the people in the communities, in communities that have been historically oppressed and marginalized, taking the power themselves and saying, this is how we want the money to be spent, and this is what we need for our communities. So pretty interesting week in Venezuela. Of course, such an important process to stay to follow. We know that in July there will be presidential elections. We've talked about on this show before. A lot of interest of the U.S. government and what happens there. We'll definitely be following it at People's Dispatch as always.
Well, interesting developments in Venezuela. On the week before you and I arrived in Venezuela, United States government once again, kind of pulled in some sanctions, rather to pressure the government of Venezuela around the elections to be held in July. And I know that we'll be reporting that from Venezuela for Give the People What They Want, for People's Dispatch, for Globetrotter. Let's go back to the story on Gaza, Zoe, because there's an interesting development. Several people in the US State Department and different departments have been resigning from their posts, their official posts over Gaza policy. There was a lot of interest when Josh Paul resigned. His was, I think the second or third resignation from the State Department over U.S. policy in Gaza. Anneli Shelin resigned. She was in the State Department. Well, now Hala Rarit, Palestinian American, has resigned. She was the Arabic language spokesperson at the U.S. State Department, the second Palestinian to resign from the U.S. government. In January, Tariq Habash resigned from the U.S. Education Ministry. I mean, the reason I'm starting this story about the student protests here is to just put on the table the fact that there's a mood generated in large parts of US population that what is happening in Gaza is simply unacceptable. And this is now escalated to a level on college campuses that I have simply not observed, in a very long time. A college campus after college campus, starting, I believe, with Vanderbilt University, have set up these encampments, these tent cities across the United States, from Columbia University in New York City all the way out to the University of California in Los Angeles. One end to the other, college students have decided, look, we are going to sit out on the green of our campus. We are going to put up tents. We are going to hold classes. It's now the Jewish holiday of Passover. We are going to conduct Passover dinners, the Seder, on the lawn. We are going to have discussions about Palestine. We're going to read books together. We are going to sing. We're going to dance. We're going to protest about the horrendous war in Gaza. Well, that's the thing that the students have been doing. The students, in a way, following those State Department officials who resigned, because they're all heartsick, literally heartsick about what has been happening in Gaza. On the other side, college administrations have been quite the opposite. It's almost a clash between two emotions. The emotion of sensitivity. We are heartsick about the death and destruction in Palestine and so on. The emotion of sensitivity is meeting, in a sense, the hard iron of money and power. It's not a question of who is the college president. I mean, in a way, Zoe, my sense is that it's not even college presidents, it's the whole ensemble. The mayors of cities, governors of states, this, that, and the other. They're pushing a clash between sensitivity and hard iron. At the University of Texas at Austin, the police force came on campus. I looked at video images of it and I thought, my God, it's almost like they are the US troops invading Iraq. The behavior of the police force is now paramilitary. It's not really just policing. It's not a friendly police officer at the corner. It's a paramilitary force occupying college campuses, throwing professors, the, you know, professors of a certain age, handcuffed ruthlessly behind their back, pushed around, and so on. This reaction by colleges and by cities and so on is going to have its own dynamic. People are just going to not respect the fact of authority. A generation previously radicalized by this or that protest has now decided this is not for me, this kind of society. In fact, one of the most viral videos of the lot, Zoe, came from a father of a student who said, I would prefer that my daughter get arrested in this period than anything else, partly because look at the situation in the world. Very powerful motivation coming from parents, their children, and so on, young people, brave, and again, brave, but in a clash with iron, sensitivity hitting iron. And fortunately, it looks like sensitivity is prevailing a little bit. They can erase the encampment, but I don't think they're going to have an easy time erasing the feeling evoked by these young students across the United States. Will this become a major student movement? I don't know. But what is very clear is that these students aren't going to pack up their sensibility and go elsewhere. You're with Give the People What They Want, brought to you from People's Dispatch. That's Zoe. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. I know our first half of the show has gone on a little long. The reason is, of course, that everybody is a little, focused on the situation in Gaza. And I think it was important to spend some time on the US student movement because it is an unusual phenomena. But that doesn't mean that students in other parts of the world are not up in arms on different issues, perhaps, but up in arms. Zoe, tell us a little bit about what those perennially protesting Argentinian students are doing.
Well, it is, as I said earlier in the show, it is a moment of tremendous youth uprising across the world. And in Argentina, that is no different. Of course, a country that has a very, very long history of student movement. And this Tuesday, they were in the streets defending public education. And I think, at least from the US perspective, when you think about public education, when you think about free higher education, you're just thinking, okay, no tuition. But it's interesting because when we look at how administrators respond to student protests, how they respond when students are occupying universities, or when they're encamping in these universities, which are theirs. They are the ones who are studying there. They are the ones who are making it the university. It is repression because in the US, university is not seen as a common good. It's not seen as something that's of the students, that's of the society. It's a private institution which is controlled by capital, which has, bankers and millionaires on their boards, which is meant to be a factory to produce people for the capitalist system. In Argentina, actually, what students are defending is the right to a university which is free, which is for the people, which is for society, where people of all walks of life can go and study, can go enrich their lives, can learn, can be qualified. And it's important to know that in Argentina, not only is tuition completely free for Argentinian students, it's free for students across the region, but also there's no entrance exam. So we see there's a lot of prestigious universities across Latin America, but extremely prohibitive for working class students to actually enter because you have to pass an exam. And of course, the dynamic of people who have then studied in private school, they take the spots, etc. In Argentina, these are completely open universities where anyone can go. And Javier Milei, as part of his chainsaw politics, his chainsaw economics, he said, okay, I'm going to freeze the budget completely for education. And goes on further to say that these universities are factories of communism, that they're just places where people get indoctrinated. And he's right. This is where critical thinking actually happens. This is where critical minds are born, because they're given the opportunity to study, to share, to learn about the world. Of course, you and I believe that once you understand how society works, you want to change it. If that makes you a communist, that's just because you're seeing life for how it is. And so these students in Argentina are bravely defending what is such an important resource for society, for humanity, and for the people of the world, which is the public university. A massive, massive mobilization on Tuesday in cities across the country. Over 1 million were on the streets, joined, of course, by the trade unions in Argentina, joined by the organizations of human rights. Of course, we know that throughout Argentine history, the public university has always been a target for the right wing, whether it was the civic military dictatorship, where, again, thousands of students were disappeared, tortured. The Night of the Pencils, and is an excellent film about this. I highly recommend it, about actually high school age students. So students are saying no more. But again, it is very difficult because of the high levels of repression by the Milei government. The stubbornness to actually take anyone seriously besides his own desires. I mean, there's already been a series of massive protests. There's going to be a general strike in the first week of May. They continue to put pressure on this government, but it's unclear actually how the Milei government will respond. People have already said that the universities have had to start to close services. They don't have light, they don't have electricity, they're running out of supplies. So it's a really difficult situation, but students are once again being the voice of reason, the voice of humanity, and demanding respect and dignity. And so that even more students who are younger than them are able to access this crucial service, because they're already enrolled. They're actually fighting for the future of the country and of the continent, of the world.
Fighting for the continent, for the future, for the world. Big words, Zoe, really big stuff. I mean, those Argentinian students, will they be able to save us from what's happening in India in the elections? Phase 2, done. India, 900 plus million people go to the polls. Phase 1 of the election, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his coalition, pushed hard on development. They were very confident that in the new parliament, out of over 500 seats, they will get 400. They said we'll cross 400 and so on. It seemed from their own analysis in the first wave of the voting that they didn't get that result. They don't feel they did. The results haven't come out yet, but the general vibe was that they were not going to get a good result from the first wave, when they had gone with this expectation of a Modi wave or Modi magic, and talking mainly about development. The fact is, inflation is up, unemployment is up. Very hard to listen to Mr. Modi all these years in power, since 2013, 11 years. What have you done on inflation? What have you done on employment? The public didn't seem to be so enthused, so Modified, as it were, this time. So what does Mr. Modi and the BJP do? They change tack. So before the second phase of the voting, the first phase was 102 seats across 21 states in India. I mean, yeah, the scale of Indian elections is extraordinary. In the second phase, which was held today on the 26th, where about 80 some seats went to the polls, the bulk of these seats, in fact, are held by the BJP-led front, the right-wing-led front. There's some exceptions. of the 20 seats from the state of Kerala, the BJP got zero last time. This time, the left is contesting a bloc of led by the Congress, the sort of center-right force in Indian politics. So the left and center-right are clashing in Kerala over those 20 seats. But in the bulk of the seats in other parts of India, it's not likely that the BJP was not in contest. I mean, in Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Karnataka, and so on, they are very much in contest. Madhya Pradesh. So Mr. Modi changed tack from merely talking about development and hit hard on the greatest wedge issue in India, which is religious division. He gave a very, very religiously divisive speech in order to rile up his base to do better in this second phase, which just closed today. We shall see what happens, but there are many phases to go. If Mr. Modi continues down this highly divisive track, he may in fact get a majority, but at a great cost to the Indian people. Let's see how it goes. We're going to keep following the Indian election. This goes on forever, guys. Don't worry. We'll stay on this story. Briefly, while we come to the end of give the people what they want, Zoe, it's so bizarre, this whole thing about TikTok. TikTok already banned in India, by the way. We're talking about the Indian election, already banned in India. But a TikTok ban in the United States, what will the children do, Zoe? What, for God's sake, will the children do?
Well, it seems like what the government wants them to do is use Meta and Google and other, wholesome U.S. platforms that harvest their data and try to, use that against them, just right here at home. But yeah, I mean, truly, it seems it's a cruel joke that this is what lawmakers in the United States are focused on. Banning a social media app, trying to make it as part of this, ridiculous attack on China. It's like a manifestation of all these different issues woven together, because on one hand, you have the fact that people don't believe in mainstream media anymore. When they turn on the TV and it says that, that Israel is great and whatever they're doing in Gaza is fine, they're going to turn it off. They know what's happening. They see it on different social media platforms. There's been a surge, of course, of content in support of Palestine on all social media platforms, because it is what the majority of humanity is saying. So on one hand, you have this fear over what kind of content is allowed on TikTok, i.e., Palestinian content, talking about protests, talking about the genocide, saying what mainstream media won't. On the other hand, you have the fact that its parent company is from China. Of course, as the CEO testified in Congress, he is from Singapore. He is not a member of the Communist Party of China. But really, it's just one of these issues to just incite hatred, incite fear. It's funny because what they say is a problem about TikTok, which is the data that's being collected and sent allegedly to China. Again, as so many people have pointed out, this is exactly every single social media platform does this. And the worst offenders of this actually are Meta, which is a US-based company. Mark Zuckerberg has a monopoly on so many, not WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, all of the other ones which we're not privy to. It's just ridiculous. They, of course, attach this to the aid package, which has been finally passed and signed into law by Joe Biden, which would give aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. Wow, look what they did there. Just join it all up and push through their extremely unpopular agenda while people are literally being tear gassed and baton attacked by, police. And as you said, these paramilitary troopers on their university campuses that, by the way, they pay $50,000 to attend. So it's, the height of American hypocrisy, of course, on display once again. It seems like the Democrats actually don't want to win the elections in November, because none of this is going to bode well for them. across the global south, TikTok has actually been used by old politicians as an attempt to reconnect with the youth. They say, not possible. We're going straight to just cut it off. So,
I mean, Zoe, one of the things I want to make sure that we say before we close down the show today is that we haven't criticized YouTube, which we use, of course,
yes.
for Give the People What They Want, which is brought to you from People's Dispatch. Today it was just Zoe, and I'm just Vijay from Globetrotter. No Prashant with us today, but hopefully soon. You've just been with Give the People What They Want. See you next week.